select a new college president for the Long Beach State College. And as I recall, the appointment of the board at that time was unanimous. I've forgotten my notes. Yeah, it was unanimous. To select Dr. McIntosh, we rated him from the state of Idaho, where he was then president of the Idaho State College. And he came down to Long Beach that time. And although the selection of President McIntosh was unanimous, none of us on the board at that time felt sure that we were doing him a favor to bring him there. I suspect that in the last 5 years he's wondered from time to time too whether he did us a favor by accepting. This was a real nest of serpents. I don't know how many of you recall the then Long Beach controversy and the Long Beach situation, but it was horrible. There was internecine warfare and guerrilla warfare and subversion and cabals and plots and plans and counterplots, and the faculty were at one another's throats and the students were at one another's throats, and they were all at the throats of the administration. That was not unusual, but the rest of it was. And it was about as wild a situation as I could recall having seen in some 16 years then on the board. But 5 years later, things are a lot better at Long Beach, and they seem to have a fairly happy faculty. The institution is proceeding toward eminence at the rate at which we had all thought at one time that it would. President McIntosh does not seem to have aged perceptibly under the strain. The students are satisfied with their lot. They have still the same dean of students they had then, which is some kind of a record. And President McIntosh is already 1 year past the average life of a college president in an American university, which is 4 years in the same institution. So even if he leaves tomorrow, he's surpassed the mean. As is part of the obituary, Dr. McIntosh is a native Californian, A.B. and LLD subsequently from the University of Redlands, M.A. and Ph.D. from Iowa, and postdoctoral study at the Trinity College of Music in London. He has been a professor of speech and dean at the University of Idaho, subsequently president of Idaho State College, has written a variety of books and monographs on diverse educational subjects, and is now, as you're aware, president of the Long Beach State College. He will address us today on the subject, the state colleges, anyone for teaching, and subsequent to that, we'll entertain questions from you. Dr. McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atkinson. I was delighted to receive at this time the news that my selection had been unanimous, because it is, so far as I know, the only thing at that institution that has been unanimous either prior to that or subsequent to it, and at least this is a source of some satisfaction to me. I think that any time asking a state college president is, in asking him to leave his desk for an hour or so to talk objectively about the California state colleges, is somewhat like dragging a man out from under Niagara Falls and asking him to provide a short commentary on the invigorating effects of a cold shower. The overabundance of experiences is apt to distort as it is to lend perspective. And none of us who are associated with the state colleges believe in planned mediocrity. In this respect, our views do not differ materially from those expressed by Dr. Robert Gordon Sproul over a quarter of a century ago. President Sproul gave a speech in Los Angeles during graduation week of 1936, in which he said, "The ambitions of individual towns and cities are not a dependable guide to the educational needs of a state. If substitutes for universities are to be established in a score or more of communities in California, there can be no great university in any community, nor in the state." And there are doubtless some people who believe that the state colleges are substitute universities, having as their mission the task of providing bargain basement education for those whose intellectual endowments are too modest to permit them to afford originals in theory, practice, or principles. There may be some who view the state colleges as retreaded teachers' colleges lately converted to a more substantial commitment to the liberal arts in order to claim or share the traditional prestige of the liberal arts. Perhaps there are some who, mistaking their architecture for their educational program, consider them too frightening to think about at all and hope they will go away. A California state college is not quite like anything else in the world. It may be defined as a multipurpose educational institution conducted as an auxiliary enterprise of the Department of Finance under the general jurisdiction of a board of trustees, subject to occasional instant policy formulation and spot management by the legislature. Perhaps the most important thing to remember about the California state colleges is that they are emerging institutions and that the process of accommodation is far from complete. There are 17 of them, ranging from San Diego in the south to Humboldt in the north. Cal Poly differs somewhat from the others, having 2 or 3 campuses and other unique and noteworthy features, but the rest, though not without valid claims of individuality, offer programs of instruction consistent with the following authorization. The primary function of the state colleges is the provision of instruction for undergraduate students, graduate students through the master's degree in the liberal arts and sciences, in applied fields and in the professions, including the teaching profession. Presently established 2-year programs in agriculture are authorized, but other 2-year programs shall be authorized only when mutually agreed upon by the trustees of the state college system and the State Board of Education. The doctoral degree may be awarded jointly with the University of California. Faculty research is authorized to the extent that it is consistent with the primary function of the state colleges and the facilities provided for that function. So much for the code definition. They range in size from San Jose, the oldest institution of higher education in California with 18,910 students, to Stanislaus with 730, or if you prefer, to San Bernardino or Palos Verdes with no students and no campus. They enroll 133,000 plus individuals, approximately 96,000 FTE, and by this dimension, the largest higher educational enterprise in the Western Hemisphere. They rely upon approximately 7,000 faculty. The total budget for 63-64 is approximately $121 million. The budget request currently before the legislature would provide a total budget of approximately $132 million. Mr. Lewis Heilbrunn, the first chairman of the current Board of Trustees and currently chairman of the board's Educational Policy Committee, stated this in Los Angeles about a year ago. I say that we should make our colleges great teaching institutions. All our energies and efforts and creative thoughts should be directed to that end. We will not merely offer curriculum, this is done in many places. We will not just conduct classes. We will seek to make all of our colleges great teaching institutions of higher learning. In short, the trustees believe the state colleges should be great teaching institutions. The faculty believe they should be great institutions. The task of any college or university president is to bring about the maximum congruence between the aspirations of the faculty, the policies of the trustees, and the identifiable needs of the students without disillusioning the alumni or alienating the legislature. California's current master plan for higher education is based on the concept of differentiation of function. The trustees of the state colleges have interpreted this to mean that the state colleges should be great teaching institutions. The unstated assumption is that undergraduates can get lost in a great university. The facts are that undergraduates can get lost in any institution, large or small, that is not committed to an extraordinary effort to prevent it. But this is a byway to explore later. A dilemma is created by the simple fact that virtually all of the faculty in the California state colleges have had their educational experience in the great universities of this country, except for a substantial number who have studied or taught in foreign universities. The only model known to them is the university, and it is simply unrealistic to believe that they will not judge what should be done by the criteria of what is done in the institutions they most admire. The trustees, however, in addition to setting forth the laudable goal of great teaching institutions, are also committed to a policy of meaningful faculty participation. Thus, the state colleges have formed academic senates, and a statewide senate has been formed as well. Faculties steeped in the university tradition regard academic policies as their special preserve, and these faculties now have the mechanism to give their own interpretation to what great teaching institutions mean to them. There are external forces which might keep the state colleges from being called universities for quite some time, but there are no external forces which could keep them from being universities. If there were no secondary constraint within the California state colleges, it is difficult to see how they could evolve in any other way than by becoming more and more like other American universities. Such constraint does exist, however, though it is not usually identified as such at the present time. The unique constraint is the posture of the multiple faculty organizations, that is the ACSCP, the CSEA, the CTA, the AFFT, and the AAUP. The AAUP has a long record of distinguished contribution to higher education. It does not always function this way, but for purposes of this discussion, it should be included. The most important dimension that distinguishes a university from any other kind of educational enterprise is its philosophy of maximum effort and its willingness to exercise critical judgments. The organizations which I have mentioned are committed collectively to the philosophy of maximum pay and the absolute protection from adverse judgments. And it is the domination of this philosophy which is the secondary constraint. In October of 1959, after I'd been at Long Beach 2 months, I concluded some remarks to the faculty by saying, good teaching is both an elusive art and an uncertain science that is most apt to flourish under conditions of maximum freedom compatible with a sense of order and accountability. Your teaching is evaluated every day, but so far as I know, no college faculty has ever agreed for long that it can be properly evaluated by anyone or any combination of the devices of peer group ratings, student evaluation checklists, formal administrative observations, or in any other way. This is one of our self-imposed frustrations. Good teaching deserves encouragement and reward, but there are no ways of securing reports of good teaching without running the risk of securing reports of poor teaching also. It is this, I think, rather than the degree of unreliability of all the various methods, which in the end defeats almost any attempt to gather data. There are probably too many self-protective devices built into the recommended distribution of unfavorable reports to permit rational consideration of such information. It is possible in ours to go too far in our zeal to protect the individual from unjust criticism. If we do, then in effect we protect the teacher from all criticism and defeat our primary purpose. And at that time I said, if you are to participate in a meaningful way in promotion and tenure decisions, you must be prepared to share the lonely task of critical judgments. Last week I reviewed with the Dean of the College the judgments of all who had evaluated the performance of probationary members of the faculty relative to the wisdom of their reappointment or their reappointment with tenure. It was necessary for us to consider 102 faculty members eligible for consideration for reappointment and 61 faculty members eligible for consideration for reappointment with tenure. Thus, a total of 163 probationary faculty members were involved. 28 departmental committees, each having a minimum of 3 faculty members, considered the contributions of certain of these individuals. 36 department chairmen gave consideration to certain of these individuals. 9 divisional committees, each composed of 3 to 5 faculty members, gave consideration to certain of these individuals. A college-wide committee composed of 5 faculty members gave consideration to each of these individuals. The committees concerned have been meeting since last October. They have provided approximately 2,100 individual judgments. Although these committees also consider faculty members who are eligible for promotion, it is reasonable to assume that on the average, 68 hours were spent by each department committee and 48 hours by each division committee, and in addition, 56 hours by the college-wide committee in arriving at the recommendations forwarded to the Dean of the College and to me. Assuming that on the average of those who devoted their time to this task, the average faculty member's time is worth not less than $8 an hour, the cost of arriving at these evaluations was approximately $67,000. The interesting thing about this process is that not one single negative recommendation was produced by these considerations. The regulations by which we are governed indicate that if a faculty member is not otherwise notified, he automatically gains reappointment for the following year. Thus, the result of this involved process is precisely the same as if no one had given the matter any thought whatever. In short, all were recommended for reappointment. I suggest that if we take seriously what has been said concerning the difficulties of recruiting able faculty members in view of the increasingly non-competitive budgets of the state colleges, and if we take into consideration the fact that it is seldom possible to arrange a personal interview with potential faculty members before they are offered positions, that this complete consensus of judgments represents either the most amazingly successful recruitment program in the history of higher education, or it suggests that peer group judgments now reinforce the concept of absolute protection of the individual from adverse decisions. No one can defend procedures which give the appearance of providing no meaningful help, insight, or assistance to those of us charged with the responsibility of carefully selecting faculty members chosen for reappointment and tenure appointment, and which do not, in fact, contribute more to our understanding of the relative merits of initial appointees than as if the entire matter had never been considered at all. This is a curious phenomenon, since most of the faculty are individually committed to the concept of maximum effort, but the constraint is dominant nevertheless. It most frequently manifests itself by a plea for autonomy, that is, self-determination, first by institutions, next by the department, and finally by the individual. It is a way of writing the word no out of the administrative process and procedures of the California state colleges. Sometimes it is almost as if James Thurber's wonderful O had been rewritten by adding an N to it to make it the wonderful no. I have in mind the passage where Black stood up and smote the table with his fist. "I'll get rid of O and uppercase and lower," cried the man in black. "I'll issue an edict. All words or books or signs with an O in them shall have the O erased or painted out. We'll print new books and paint new signs without an O in them." And so the locksmith became a locksmith, and the bootmaker maker. And people whispered like conspirators when they said the names Love's Labor's Lost, and Mother Goose flattened out like a pricked balloon. Books were books, and Robin Hood was Little Goody Two-Shoes lost her O's, and so did Goldilocks, and the former became a whisper, and the latter sounded like a key jigged in a lock. It was impossible to read Cock-a-Doodle-Doo aloud, and parents gave up reading to their children, and some gave up reading altogether, and the search for the precious jewels went on. This may seem exaggerated, but like Thoreau, I desire to speak somewhere without bounds, like a man in a waking moment, to men in their waking moments, for I am convinced that I cannot exaggerate enough even to lay the foundations of a true expression. If the California state colleges are to become greater teaching institutions, then great teaching must be rewarded, and before it can be rewarded, it must be identified. Traditionally, faculties have resisted all attempts to measure it. The criteria used to define it rely upon high-level abstractions, and information concerning it accrues by a kind of academic osmosis. The sacred cows must be examined also. For example, a faculty member must be active in research. I will stipulate that a faculty member must be active, and that if he is genuinely curious about things, it's difficult to avoid engaging in research. But I submit that the length of the publication list is not an infallible guide to the individual's capacity to motivate, stimulate, or even to communicate. The administration, as well as the faculties of the California state colleges, must risk the hazards and uncertainties of doing something for the first time. There are no suitable models. Last year, I said to the faculty, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act in 1862, he brought into being a system of land-grant colleges or universities, which now include among their numbers some of the great institutions of the world. For 100 years, these institutions have been true to their purpose. They came into being in response to an emerging frontier society's need for the education or training which would match the opportunities of that day. And the Morrill Act concludes that it is to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. Now, 100 years later, in the largest state in the Union, the California state colleges have before them an opportunity which has been unmatched since the adoption of the Morrill Act. The master plan has emphasized the research function of the university and supposedly restricted its admission to the top 12% of students graduating from high school. For a brief moment in history, the California State Colleges have the opportunity to analyze the kind of education which will match the opportunities of the urban frontier and in similar fashion promote the liberal and practical education of this burgeoning society. The California State Colleges cannot seize this opportunity unless the individual colleges have some of the characteristics of a task force as well as some of the characteristics of our respected traditions. Like other colleges and universities, we must confront students with ideas and information and evolve or demonstrate principles in ways they can understand and evaluate. In order to do this, we must know something about our students and something about what we think we are prepared to teach them. Our greatest error has been the neglect of the former and our lack of humility about the latter. Unlike some institutions, there is no reason why each faculty member in the State College should not have an individual conference with every student in every class he teaches. If State College faculty members are not interested in students, they should get out of the state colleges. If they are, and I believe almost all of them are, then this practice alone, assuming only average insight and impact, would, in my judgment, reduce the attrition rate by a measurable and meaningful amount. There are a great many respectable excuses for not teaching students anything. I've heard most of them. For example, if they don't take their course seriously, that's their funeral. It's time someone jolted them into buckling down. There are so many who are not really college material. It's time we stop spoon-feeding them. They're adults now. It's not my job to motivate. If they're not motivated, they shouldn't be here. You can't expect us to teach what they should have learned in high school, or it's merely a matter of standards. No college or university should admit any student who cannot reasonably be expected to succeed in the program to which he is admitted if he puts forth his best effort. No faculty member should be content until he has done all that he can reasonably be expected to do to encourage his students to put forth their best effort. No administration should regard a lengthy flunk list as a symbol of academic purity and evidence per se of high standards. High and low are relative terms. They have no meaning without a referent. No matter how conscientious the effort, some students will fail. None of us lives in a vacuum, and the college environment is one of calculated difficulty. There will be many whose personal lives will be complicated by crises of all varieties, and each student will face academic problems of varying difficulty for him. But the State College must not neglect those students who are destined to do such a large measure of the world's work, some of whom will inevitably achieve positions of leadership far beyond our present power to predict. A wealth of resources can often breed an arrogant indifference to anything but the best. I can still recall with chagrin one of my first duck hunts in Idaho over 20 years ago. I shot a widgeon and a couple of pintail, and my new hunting companion strolled over, looked at them, and said, "We only shoot mallards. If the hunting's any good, we only shoot greenheads." When students are arriving in numbers like the old northern flights, it's easy to neglect the not quite so brilliant. It is also a mistake of monstrous proportions. The state colleges have their fair share of the most able. It is our task to create an environment of respect which does not rely entirely upon SAT scores and graduate stipends as the hallmarks of personal worth. This is not an easy task in an environment which by its very nature is intellectual, but this is nonetheless the defensible goal of the California State Colleges. There is no such thing as mass education, and education is a very personal matter. Each individual acquires one for better or for worse. Every faculty member who walks into a lecture room and closes the door has 50 minutes which can be meaningless or can to some one student be an important part of his life. It makes no difference at that moment whether there are 6 other classrooms in the building or 600. The size of the war is not the immediate concern of the man in the foxhole. Talking about mass education is not necessarily improper, but it's important to remember that it happens to individuals. It happens only to individuals, and if we lose sight of this, we accept an artificial conformity of our own making. Our assignment is to expand our concept of what is required, and if we are to live honestly with the demands of our age. About 3 years ago, I received the report, The University and World Affairs. Chancellor Murphy served on the committee which formulated and distributed the report. 2 years ago, I reported the Chancellor of the California State Colleges my plan to incorporate within our college the position of Coordinator of International Educational Programs in order to help maintain the focus of attention on our opportunity and obligations. 3 weeks ago, I made such an appointment. Last Friday, I received a copy of the College and World Affairs which supplements the earlier report. It begins with the following paragraph. This report is a plea to educate young men and women in such ways as to enable them to respond with sensitivity and intelligence to a world which is characterized by a plurality of cultures and by pervasive and tumultuous change. It springs from the conviction that liberal education is at its center a process by which men come to understand themselves and their own destinies through understanding their identity with and differences from human beings in other cultures and society. And it concludes by saying, we are proposing that those responsible for undergraduate education give serious and sustained thought to how they can best incorporate into undergraduate life and work significant experience from the cultures other than the familiar ones of Western Europe and North America. This procedure would lead to the enrichment of courses normally elected by large numbers of freshmen and sophomores. More specialized courses must be made available to upper-class students. We leave it to the individual institutions to determine the advisability of establishing area majors in special language instruction. There is no one orthodox pattern of instruction or organization. Different institutions will want to follow different methods, and the resulting diversity of experimentation will be helpful to all. We repeat that what is most needed is a clear and unequivocal institutional commitment to what in shorthand fashion we have called the international studies dimension of liberal education. It is too late merely to play with new ideas. The changes which are now called for cannot be accomplished in a half-hearted way. They require recognition on the part of both faculty and students that the new international dimension is not an extra, but an integral part of the educational program. They require conviction about the ends to be realized, a readiness for genuine innovation, and the vision to see that the revolution in education is, in the last analysis, a continuation and realization of what liberal education at its best has always tried to be. In the state colleges, we must do this during a period of unprecedented growth, in an environment characterized by a high coefficient of frustration, and for reasons which are not altogether clear to me, we must perform this task largely without a command of the resources, the determinants, or the instruments of decision, which are the frequent concomitants of college or university administration. But I should not wish to end on this note, because the task, though formidable, is worth the effort of those who can retain a sense of perspective and a reasonable degree of hope. If there are enough who can derive their greatest satisfactions from the success of their students, then perhaps we can accomplish our objectives. After all, Thurber's wonderful world of O concludes, working with valor and love and hope, the islanders put the O back in everything that had lost it. The name of Goldilocks regained its laughter, and there were locks for keys, and shoes were no longer she's. A certain couple once more played their fond duets on mandolin and glockenspiel. Ophelia Oliver, who had vanished from the haunts of men, returned wearing both her O's again. Otto Ott could say his name without a stammer, and dignity returned to human speech and English grammar. Once more, a man could say boo to a goose and tell the difference between to lose and too loose. Every family had again a roof and floor, and the head of the house could say in English as before, someone open or close the door. None that have been specially prepackaged and planted and ready to go off at this hour, so you are not interrupting any script if there's something on your mind that you want to ask now.
Information on the subject, which is somewhat briefly about, I don't know, a great deal. That situation with
San Francisco State College with this position? Well, I'm not sure that I commented on that directly, but when I said that the no had at times seemed to have been written out, and that the desire for autonomy, first on the part of an institution and second on the part of a department and lastly on the part of an individual, was an observable phenomenon, I was not necessarily avoiding that problem because I am not competent to analyze or to judge all of the issues or all of the issues that are claimed to be issues. But there is, it seems to me, some question of who wakes the bugler involved in the San Francisco matter. I think it's a question of some people who did not like some things that were done. Now, there are traditional ways of responding to this. There is a mechanism through the state colleges, either through the academic senates that I mentioned or through the Chancellor's Council or others. It is at times, I think, a temptation sometimes which of getting outside of channels in an attempt to invite the direct short circuit of legislative action to correct some assumed difficulty or problem. Unless there was someone who was willing to state precisely what the problem was, I'm not sure that I could penetrate it in such depth as to pretend to analyze what the problem is there, but I think essentially there are some people that don't like something. And the question of whether they like it or not may or may not be related to whether or not it is a justifiable policy or not, or whether the procedures to which they object are justifiable. There has been some way in which this has been linked to the whole matter of certification standards and the question of what state colleges or other institutions should do to match their academic programs with those standards, but I'm certainly not prepared to say that that is central to the issue. I have not answered your question, but I have commented to the points raised by it, sir. Let me comment to this because I think that to answer for one college may not be to answer for all. But it is our belief that the entire adult education function is, as we understand the term, not the province of the state colleges. We are trying to abandon the use of extended day because it has created the impression that these are somehow a different kind of class. We have morning classes, we have afternoon classes, we have evening classes. It would have to be acknowledged in all candor that I think a higher percentage of the evening classes are taught by part-time faculty, but they are by no means taught exclusively by part-time faculty, and the faculty who do teach evening courses do not teach the evening courses for an added stipend, as is a frequent consideration of most extension programs. The policy is that the resident full-time faculty are, unless otherwise excused on a personal basis, expected to be able to meet classes during a schedule which starts at 7 or 8 in the morning and lasts until 10 at night. We do not ask that there be any particular day in which the individual responsibility covers more than a 9-hour span. In other words, if nobody's asked to teach at 8 o'clock in the morning and one that lasts 10 o'clock at night the same day, and we try not to schedule early morning classes after late evening assignments. So presumably the schedule for any individual faculty member might conceivably fall in the hours of 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or 10 to 7 or 11 to 8 or 12 to 9 or whatever. But in this sense, it is the use of it, the use of this schedule, is to make the maximum use of the facilities that we have and to also attempt to accommodate a sizable number of students who, because of the fact that they are employed full-time, find it more practical and feasible to go to school in the evening. But these are students who are working 4 degrees and who are, all of them are matriculated students in the college. So they do not have to specify a degree objective to be enrolled in the college, but they will be enrolled in courses which are a part of the college's offering 4-degree objective programs. Occasionally, there are some short courses that are scheduled under the auspices of the Long Beach State College Foundation that are not scheduled for credit, but they're relatively few in number, and they are by no means the traditional offerings which we expect the City College in Long Beach to satisfy. It's Long Beach City College that carries on the adult education program for that city and that area. There you have a wide variety of choices to choose from, and we attempt never to duplicate those. In fact, even in some of the short courses that are non-credit courses, we call across town first to see whether or not this is anything that might be scheduled or that they might be planning to schedule before even any of the short non-credit courses are scheduled. Well, the teaching profession is unique in one respect in that, so far as I know, traditionally at least, we have not paid very much attention to the clients. I assume at least that the judgment of a patient has some bearing on the status of the doctor or the dentist. The judgment of the client may have some bearing on the success of the attorney. We have relied pretty largely on the judgment of each faculty member's colleagues, and hopefully over a period of time we can arrive at some pretty good judgments. The question is whether or not we can get to other measures of this. No one can have been through any college or university without drawing some conclusions, I suppose, and prejudices of his own as to what constitutes good teaching. And one of the things about it is that very often, after we have said what we think characterizes it, we check back into our own experience and find that perhaps the individual who contributed more to us personally than perhaps any other single member of the faculty, curiously enough, did not exhibit any of these particular characteristics, but somehow managed to get us to do better work than we ever thought we were capable of doing. Now, whether it is the teacher who can communicate at all levels with the respect of those that he's talking to, whether it be his colleagues in postdoctoral research or whether it be students below college level, I don't know. I have known a few people who could do this and make that communication meaningful. But I don't think that it is an impossible task if we look to the opinions of students, if we try to look to the opinions of students as well as the opinions of the peer groups. And perhaps it would be well to ask those who have pursued it for a matter of 2 or more decades how they feel the criteria might be applied so that there would be some reasonable concurrence with respect to the evaluations reported. I think that if I had had any very pat answer to it, it would probably have been tried, or someone else would have had it too. I don't know. I think this is one of the primary challenges that faces any institution that says it's going to reward great teaching. It's how to measure it, how to define it, and how once having recognized it to gain a consensus of what its characteristics are. Sir? Yes, I think there have been promotions that have been held up because the faculty member did not have the PhD. And I suppose a part of this is because, generally speaking, you have a certain amount of time. I think if you were going to start out to build a faculty for a small institution, if you had the time to search out the particular individual, that it would be quite possible to assemble a distinguished faculty, none of whom had the PhD, and perhaps none of whom had advanced degrees, and some of whom had no degrees at all. You don't have this kind of time. There are times that you have to look for the symbols, and whatever else it says this, that the individual who possesses one has been willing to subject himself to the discipline required to get one, and hopefully, after having done so, if he comes from one of the country's major graduate schools, after that anything will seem like an easy assignment. At least this is one of the hopes that you have when you look for the PhD. It also indicates that at least the individual has found it has been willing to do this and has found it possible to do it. You cannot conclude that because a person does not hold such a degree that he is unable to do so. He may be unwilling to do so, he may be unable to do so, he may be unwilling to do so. But to some extent, over the broad range of numbers with which you must deal, the PhD is at least, it is one of the possible measures of commitment, perhaps more a measure of commitment than anything else, because certainly the person who decides to work for one is committing a certain part of his life, a certain part of his time, a substantial amount of his money, a very substantial amount when you start considering in what he forgoes during the time that he's working for it. So while it may not always be a measure of ability, it may not always be a measure of a lack of ability if a person does not have it, certainly the presence of it does indicate a willingness for commitment. And I think for these reasons, and perhaps others, we place some value on it, and we look for it. We expect the committed person to have it. I would say this, that I always like to look past the degree at the individual. Now, to say that there have not been quarrels concerning the relative status of those two degrees would be simply to ignore things that have gone on in the various coffee shops, corridors, seminars, and others in the state colleges and in universities and in other institutions for years. But I am interested only in the degree as the first. What I want to know is what is back of the degree. What does the man have to offer? I'm much more interested in the person than I am the particular letters. The degree, I think, does not open doors for anyone. It sometimes keeps them from being closed, and the EDD is just as apt to keep a door from being closed in most areas as the PhD, as far as I'm concerned. At least I hope that I will never acquire that particular kind of bias, which means that once having seen that degree or any other degree, I refuse to look any further to try to determine what kind of person it is, what kind of education he has had, what contribution he is prepared to make, what degree of commitment he is willing to make, and how hard he is willing to try to make the kind of contribution that presumably the preparation has gone in for. At least that's my answer to you, sir. When I said that the state colleges should be primarily, no, I think I said somewhere in there that the assumption seemed to be that it was possible for students to get lost, for undergraduates to get lost in a great university. And I said, I thought the facts were that it was possible for undergraduates to get lost in any public or private institution of any size unless you make extraordinary efforts to prevent it. I don't think it is a matter of looking at the structure of the organization. It is a matter of saying what practices do we follow and what seems important to us in our dealing with students. Because there are some problems that come in as you start dealing in numbers, that it is easy to become tangled up in the bureaucracy. Some of us have to fight what amounts to the increasing bureaucratic aspects of organization, which just simply do occur as institutions get larger and continue to focus attention on the fact that we are dealing with individuals, not with mass numbers. So I say that this is a matter of the way an institution wants to approach it. I don't think that this is something that any institution could disclaim as its responsibility. All institutions have to decide where to place priorities among a lot of things which, if you looked at them as you would like to, all of which have first priority. But my feeling is that there is nothing that prevents any institution from any size from making extraordinary attempts to bring quality education to the individual undergraduate if it is willing to devote the time and the money and the effort to that task. Let me go back and try to express again what it was that I tried to say. I tried to say that one of the dilemmas is that the trustees believe, and the state colleges should be, great teaching institutions. I've also said that the trustees have approved a mechanism whereby through local senates and the statewide academic senate that the faculties are able to interpret according to their views what great teaching institutions or what great institutions mean to them. I have suggested that when you take the faculties of the California state colleges, who come for the most part from this country's great universities, about 61% of our people have obtained their doctoral degrees from the great universities of this country. That when you start talking to them about great institutions, they think in terms of the institutions they most admire. So that to that extent, the pressure is on internally, always it seems to me, for institutions to assume some of the characteristics that we think of as characteristics of universities. I think it's a negative quality. I was simply trying to define it as one of the dilemmas in which there will be an inevitable growth in this direction unless there is some secondary constraint, which I attempted also to identify as existing at this time. Whether it will continue or not, I have no idea. No, I don't think that there is anything. I don't think there's anything necessarily improper about it, unless it is an attempt to assume a structure for the sake of a structure, rather than attempting to determine what the most appropriate function is and how the organization should be structured to discharge that function. I personally have a dislike for a mechanism that doesn't do anything. That is, just to have a mechanism for the sake of having it is to me, I just don't care for that thing. I do feel that we should structure these organizations in terms of what our function is to be, and to the extent that that parallels the structure of a university, well and good. But let us do it for a purpose. Let us do it for a functional purpose, not just because we say, well, it's always been done this way, because this is the thing that we are most apt to do, is to look at it in that regard and to take as our models the institutions we most admire. I think that most of the drive is in the direction of following that structure which has been found to be appropriate and successful in the past. I don't think that there will be any diminution of this drive from within the institutions. That is perhaps an overly long answer to your question, but do we have time? I'm not sure that I have identified it precisely, and I'm not sure that anything could be. I don't think I quite followed what you meant by this trend. Well, I don't know that the answer I give will be an answer. I do feel that California, by relying upon its wide system of junior colleges, has kept the doors open to all high school graduates, and that the most able of those will qualify for the institutions, and that the public institutions, if you consider the junior colleges and the state colleges and the university as comprising the totality of the opportunity that the student has, there's a very wide variety of opportunity there. And it does not seem to me that it has been substantially restricted when we consider all of the opportunities available to students. There have been in other states at other times, and perhaps even still, state-supported universities which by either law or long tradition were committed to keeping the door open for all of the high school graduates of those states. And the attrition rate was usually very substantial, and it's an expensive way to reduce your actual admission standards below your stated admission standards. But it has been done, and it probably will continue to be done. But I do feel that within the state of California, there is opportunity for students for quality public education when we consider all of the junior college system as well as the state college and the university. I think it's a dilemma of the faculty, and when I said that the faculties were interested, I said the faculties were interested in great institutions, period, just great institutions, and that they look in certain directions for their models. We have to recognize that research is not only important in its own right, it is currently one of the status symbols of an academic society. and that in addition to its being an important aspect of work in its own right, as one of its status symbols, it's also looked to as one of the things that you simply must do if you are going to be anyone or do anything. Well, in the comments that I made, I said I think it's a difficult thing for a person who is active to avoid engaging in research, but I think one of the things that we have done, unfortunately, is to somehow create the idea that unless you have millions of dollars worth of machinery back of you and a white-jacketed phalanx of research assistants, that it's impossible to do research. This simply is not the case, and one of the things that we perhaps should do more of is to indicate that there is a lot of research that is possible that is not dependent upon expensive equipment, that is not dependent upon the kinds of multiple figure grants from some of the federal agencies, which admittedly we're happy to have, but that it is a kind of activity, a kind of curiosity about things, a sort of approach to life that people who are involved in teaching just can hardly avoid. And I have no patience, really, with the people who say, well, I'm very much interested in research. Well, is that right? What are you interested about? Well, then you don't get an answer until they look around and find out where the money is for the research. It seems to me that that approach to it should not characterize our efforts, that we have, I suppose, between $250,000 and $300,000 of sponsored research grants at Long Beach. We have more individual grants than any of the other state colleges. But again, it's been with the hope that this money follows the interest and is not the thing, not the thing which is distracting to the individual. There comes a time when anyone must make some choice about how he spends his time. There comes a time when you cannot expand it from a 24 to a 36 or a 48-hour day. This choice eventually has to be made. Time is the most precious thing you have. More money you can get. More skill, more people, more equipment. These things you can get. More time you cannot get. This is the single most precious thing that anybody has to work with. And it's in this area where the distinction sometimes has to be made. There are people that they'd love to do both, but sometimes you do face that choice where you can no longer do everything equally well. And it's in this area where I think that we must say that if the California state colleges are to remain great teaching institutions, then the proportion of the time spent of those who are in them can never become so high in terms of their commitment to research that there isn't time left to devote to the needs of the undergraduate students, because these institutions are primarily undergraduate institutions. We offer master's degrees. There are many master's degrees granted, but primarily these are undergraduate institutions. And it's our hope to preserve the sense of worth for the undergraduate, the respect for him, and to permit the faculty to engage in that amount of research which he can, just as a matter of an individual being alive in an intellectual climate, must do. And we'll help him, support him in those efforts, but sooner or later he may have to make some decisions about what he wants to do. I think that we have practically built-in laboratories for this kind of thing because we have the numbers which make it possible to have multiple section courses. Having multiple section courses, I think it's quite possible to teach them in different ways according to controlled preconceptions of what you want to try to find out. Without expanding it greatly, it seems that this is one of the things that many faculty members may do in a relatively unstructured way, but with just a little more attention to the structuring of the experimental approach, that perhaps we could find some things out by a better controlled approach to it than the somewhat random experimentation which perhaps all of us have done who have ever taught. But certainly there are great opportunities here. The students are there, the faculty is there, for the most part, the resources are there. We have some other opportunities. Each institution will have opportunities that are unique to it, which exist simply because they exist. We happen to be next to the Veterans Hospital. There are kinds of research in which we can participate which we could not, except for that coincidence. 3 minutes away, there's one of these communities where everybody's that's living down there is over 52 and retired, and some 8 or 12,000. I mean, a building kind of laboratory situation that is 5 minutes down the road. These are the kinds of things which, without going out and bringing in tremendous amounts of money, exist and can be explored, and maybe we can find out some things which, in terms of some of these, I think would be warranted. But we do have the resources to explore to a greater extent than we have in our own institution the ways in which teaching may be more effective, and the other side of the coin, the ways in which learning may be even more enjoyable. Because I hate to see education come to a point where everybody thinks of it as something that is grim. If it does not remain one of the most enjoyable aspects of life, then we have lost something out of it, and we've got to find ways of putting it back in. Sure, the competition is there. The competitive environment is there. But somehow there has to be the excitement and the enjoyment remain a part of it.
Thank you very much, Dr. McIntosh. It was quite enlightening. Enough ideas for us to toss around a bit and mull these over for when we come back next week, as I want to remind you, in the men's lounge of the Student Union, to hear what Chancellor Murphy has to say. So if you want to put him on the hot seat and see what the university is doing, this is your chance. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much for being with us.